Edward, and Christopher Henningsen discuss Chris's new book, Health Advice for Young Dragons.
Christopher, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on, David.
Of course, and of course, my condolences for you being in Canada.
Yes, well, we all have our cross to bear, don't we?
That's not very respectful, is it? I was just saying I was going to be very respectful, and then the first thing I do is insult your country.
Oh, well, our countries kind of like to poke each other, don't we? Like, it's the kind of relationship we have, I think.
It is. I will say, and this isn't a political show or anything, but in the U.S., we really do consider Canada the U.S. North, and that's just how we look at it. So we have a pretty good relationship, and it's fun for us to go spend money in Canada because our dollar goes a little bit farther. So
it's fun for us when you spend money here also, so it's a win-win.
Well, that's good. All right, Christopher. So we're here talking because you have written a very specific book that I want to get into, and it's an illustrated book, but it's called Health Advice for Young Dragons.
Yeah, it was kind of
Yeah.
an inspired title. So when I was younger, I studied a lot of five elements energy healing, and I always kind of associated that with sort of the four phases of matter, and there's four major neurotransmitters. So it's this very deep kind of a system of health. But I also noticed that sort of the things that made the most difference to my own health were very simple, easy to understand pieces of advice that were given to me in this straightforward way when I was still very young. And I just internalized those things, like read the back of the ingredients list for before you buy anything, or if you're feeling sick, think about what you ate, and you'll feel sicker when the thing that made you sick is coming up. So things like that, they're really very common sense. Everyone knows them, but because I came across them when I was young, those have kind of stuck with me. So I thought it would be kind of fun to make a children's book about health, using these sorts of five elements principles. And when I wrote it, I actually, instead of talking about space, which is this very abstract concept, I talk about play, which is essentially the same thing. It's the communication between all the different parts of your health, the exploration and bringing into balance. So, yeah, it was a very fun book to write.
Well, yeah, well, and it's a good book for people to read too, right?
I would hope so.
I mean, that's the goal of this. And this is mostly geared towards younger readers, is that right?
Yeah, or younger readers and their parents.
Sure. Anyone who's going to
Reading them through
force
it,
them to
yeah.
actually read something, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that. I can't remember. I remember as a kid when I didn't know how to read. I was learning to read. I think it was a Dr. Seuss book, but I couldn't read. It had been read to me enough. I had memorized what was on each of the pages, so I could say it and
Mhm.
pretend like I read.
Yeah.
Not that you care about my early life memories,
Dr.
but that's it.
Well,
That memory
Dr.
just
Seuss is
yeah,
so
but
many early memories.
that literally just flashed through my head when you mentioned that.
Mhm.
So I think
Mhm.
that's really interesting. Now, and you're not coming at this uncredentialed. I mean, you hold patents for. I didn't fully. You explained it to me. I didn't fully understand it, but it's a Canadian patent for things. And I mean, you're decently educated. So I mean, this is just good, solid, sound advice from someone who knows what they're talking about.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I do have a technical education, and then I try to pair that. I was always interested in sort of energy, and then I studied renewable energy, which I'm very fascinated in that interplay between, science and the more traditional ways of understanding the universe, and how those aren't really irreconcilable. They're just very different languages that take a while to translate into one another into. So I've done my best to do that in this book.
Yeah. Now, how did you with a very technical background, what was the process like to go through some of these foundational memories or things that you had learned and wrap
Mhm.
them in a book that is going to be engaging, for an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old or however old they are, to read and also, take something away from how hard was that to do?
It's a good question. I sort of had the idea in the back of my mind for a very long time of eat, breathe, sleep, play as this as these foundations of health, and then I realized that was a lot like this five element system that I had learned as a teenager, and I added drink in there. Um,
I add drink
But
to a
it,
lot of things. Sorry.
yes, yeah, no,
Not
absolutely.
not just to hydrate though, but anyway.
Well, you might find that the book encourages encourages certain aspects of that also. I mean, I think the relaxation and the coming back into flow and reminding yourself that things are going to be okay. That is actually a very important part of health also. And I jokingly call it a book for dragons, young and old, but to a dragon, all humans are pretty young. So I think that we can all sort of benefit from the reminder to play a bit more.
Nice.
But to come back to your question, the process of writing the book, I had these sort of snippets of poetry in my mind for a really long time, like several years, where I thought this would make a fun children's book. Like this is just good, solid health advice in a verse kind of form, with this sort of dragon mysteriousness energy aspect to it. But I didn't really. It took me a while to collect a number of those snippets before I thought, you know what, I'm going to write down and I'm going to put these in the proper order and put something to fill in the blanks, and that was the process of writing it.
Because the book, and correct me if I get any of this wrong, but the book is basically a poem, and is each page, is it called a stanza? Is that I don't know the term? Is that a stanza? Each page is a stanza? Is that the right term?
I think it's properly called a ballad.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
My
American education, I don't
meter,
know.
I guess. Canadian education is not really any better.
Oh, sure it is.
The English had their poetry down, but somehow that didn't make it across the water. I don't know why. So one of the best parts of the English, in my opinion. Maybe that's why they kept it to themselves.
Right. That's they coveted it.
Yes. But no, I think it's quatrains. It's these four line poems.
Right.
Yeah, I think the meter is called a ballad meter, but I'm not so certain about that.
Well, but it's each page is like, I mean, it is a piece of art because you have the illustrator, but the mood of the page, the colors that are used. I mean, a tremendous amount of work went into taking that I'll call it a stanza. I don't know what to call it, the 4 lines, whatever that is.
Yeah,
a quatrain.
Maybe it's a stanza.
Yeah, whatever. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But you have it on the page, and it's artfully centered, and then you have the illustration. How did that go about? Because you're not the artist, right? You hired an illustrator.
Yeah, Ali Khan Takanaka. He did a fantastic job.
Really did.
Yeah. What I did, what the process was I went on Upwork was the freelancer site that I used, and I posted the job description that I'm looking for a children's book illustrator, and I linked to a Google document with the entire poem, and I invited a number of people to have a look at the poem and tell me how they would approach it. And Ali Khan, I guess he just saw it, like a lot of people just saw it, recommended, and he sent me a sketch, which was really nice. It's a lot like what's in one of the earliest pages.
Okay.
So he kind of saw it, and he clearly took some inspiration from it and immediately showed me what he had done. So there was this immediate connection of, oh wow, this guy, like, I felt like he got it, when you write a poem like that, you don't really know, because I'm not that kind of artist. You don't really know what it's going to inspire in someone, but it was clear from the way that he responded to it that he had drawn some inspiration from it. So was
absolutely. I mean, he really brings the words to life in a new way. It's very, very, very well done. I mean, I've seen a lot of these, and they're not all this well done. but this one, I mean, and like I said, I just go back to the colors, because for me, I mean, the striking, and I don't know, I don't think there's from some of the scenes are 2 pages, some of the scenes are 1 page, but everyone is very much its own thing, its own color palette, its own concept. So now, how long did it take to iterate through that process with him?
It took a couple of months.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was I mean, I think the Japanese manga artists, like they're used to working on a deadline. And he really like he worked very, very quickly once we agreed to work together. He sort of finished some rough outlines very quickly. Well, he started actually by showing me examples of different art styles and
that's a
asking
good
me to
way to do
pick
it.
out.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I had this collage and I like was circling the the character art and the concept sketch and the color sort of palette that most spoke to me. But I also encouraged him to take a lot of artistic freedom with the project, and it was more like there were little details, like for example the main character, who is this young dragon. He drew him with these horns, and I kind of asked for the horns to look more crown like, because I feel like that's how a child reading this about themselves would picture themselves,
nice.
would maybe picture themselves with this dragon crown around their head. So like there were little tweaks like that that I asked for, but he also really ran with it, and I really appreciated the way that he was able to bring it to
So
life. And yeah.
because there's like maybe I mean there's like almost 30 beautiful paintings in this thing, or whatever you want to call them, right? 30 different pieces of
Yeah,
art. Yeah, yeah. So
yeah. He did a fantastic job. I'd definitely work with him again.
yeah. All right. So when a young person reads this, say an 8-year-old reads this, what do they get out of it?
What I hope they get out of it is a couple of really good, solid pieces of advice around their health. You know, eat well, drink well, breathe well, sleep well, and don't spend so much time on any of these that you're not playing enough. And if things get out of balance, you know, bringing them back into balance is its own game, and not everyone is the same. So a lot of this stuff one has to figure out, which is something that I find very helpful for my own health, is
Yeah,
that remembering that we have to figure a lot of stuff out for ourselves.
yeah.
But the basics of just, this is how it feels when you've eaten well, this is how it feels when you've slept well, and this is how it feels when you haven't. And
Yeah. Interesting. All right. So
mhm,
the book's been out for we looked at about 2 months, just a little over two
mhm,
months. Has anything
yeah.
surprised you about its release or about actually having a book out?
There was one thing that I found really like touching, which was that I mentioned on Facebook, which I'm not on very much anymore, but I mentioned on Facebook that I had published this book. And so many of my high school friends were a lot of whom who have young families of their own now, were so supportive. You know, people I hadn't spoken to in a really
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
That was really like, that was moving. I was really kind of feeling really warm and fuzzy inside
Yeah.
after
I
that.
don't want to give anything away, but I wonder what they're getting for Christmas. How about a book?
Yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
So how long did it take from the time you had the idea to do this to the time I mean, specifically, was it a year, two
Mm.
years, 2 months?
I think from the time I first thought this is a neat concept for a children's book, to when I actually put pen to paper, was about, well, it was pre-COVID, so maybe 4 or 5 years, 4 years.
Oh,
It
wow.
was about 4 years that it was just knocking around in my head. And then once I actually put pen to paper, it took about a month.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was sometimes it's like that. Yeah.
Well, but it's one of those things because I mean, and this is such a crafted book, right? I mean, and it stems from a poem.
Mhm,
By the time you went to write it down, you had worked it out, right? I mean, your subconscious
mhm.
had played it out over years. So
Yeah,
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 so I think
yeah.
that's
It had
okay.
a.
So are you bouncing around another book in there?
Oh well, yeah. I mean, I wrote another book slightly before that and
Oh, okay,
published it, called Mindful Programming, which was a lot
probably
of
not.
fun. That's more for
I
adults.
was gonna say not for 8-year-olds, right? Well, in today's world, though, who knows, right? Maybe it is.
Well, yeah, maybe. There's some pretty genius 8-year-olds out there, I'm
There
sure.
are.
So
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're listening, I've got another book you might like too.
8-year-olds are the best when they get their parents'
Yeah.
credit cards. You can sell them anything.
Oh, lovely. Well,
I'm just kidding. It's my American sense of humor.
don't steal your parents' credit cards, kids.
And don't just borrow
Ask their permission. Yeah.
Sneak it back in. It's all
Tell
good.
them it's a wholesome book that they should buy you 2 copies of.
You know what? This reminds me of another movie where there's like good advice on this shoulder and bad advice on this shoulder. All right.
The angels and demons.
Well, so speaking of advice, what advice would you have for someone who wants to write a book, but not just any book, but a book like this that involves the illustrations and honestly a very, I don't want to say the message because that doesn't work in today's world, but good advice, for kids or whoever. What advice would you have for them who want to write a book on advice?
I'll say that, and plug the book a little as I do so. That
That's okay.
There needs to be, I think, a sense of fun because writing anything is difficult, and a lot of the advice out there, most of the advice I could give is about what worked for me, and certain things work for me, like writing on the first draft on pen and paper works for me better than being in front of a screen. Thinking about it, trying to say as much of it in my head before I do that works for me. But that's not necessarily good advice for everyone. I think what is good advice for everyone is to kind of find the process that works for you. Because if you can't really follow everyone's advice. There's too much and it doesn't agree with itself. But
well said.
But you can try enough out to get a sense of where you're starting to get some traction, and get that sense of playfulness and the fear of the blank page being balanced by the joy of the blank page. That I think is really a very personal sort of process. So I would advise people who are trying it out is to try enough different approaches, that you find the one that does work for you, because not all pieces of advice are meant for you.
Well, I think that's really good advice too, which is if you try it one way, it doesn't work, don't get frustrated, because there's a million ways to do this.
There's so many ways. And one of my favorite pieces of writing advice is that Neil Gaiman interview where he talks like 20 minutes just about fountain pens and how much he likes writing with fountain pens, which it's so personal. It gives an idea that it is such a personal process. And there's certain things like, to me, writing in the morning works, writing pen on paper works, but there's a lot of advice that I've tried that hasn't worked also, which has worked very well for other people.
Well, and that's the whole point of these videos, right? Because I mean, people can find in them the ideas that work for them. Because not everything. I mean, for me, when I first started doing this, and I've written a ton of books by now, I kind of went online, I watched videos. I'm just trying to figure out how do you do it, and there was like this generic marching sameness to the advice, and it was a disaster for me. It just isn't how I work at all. So I developed my own way, and I think the best advice, I think that's really good advice, which is if you start doing it one way, it doesn't work, don't think you're not a good writer. Find a way to make it work. And by the way, it's been rattling around my head. If I were to ask someone the question here in the US, what do we have too much of and contradicts itself? We would call that the news, just to close this out. So I think that that line is brilliant. That's going to wind up in one of my books because it's freaking brilliant. I love that line. There's too much of it and it contradicts itself. So all right, Christopher, look, it's been great talking to you. And we'll stay in touch and hopefully have a lot of success with this book.
Thanks so much. Really great talking to you, David.
Thanks, sir. Bye.
Have a good one.
Thank you for watching. Please consider hitting the subscribe button.